if I can pipe in just to make sure everybody knows, we are recording this conversation today, so that anyone who was unable to check in with us on the recording live can catch it later. And also, I just wanted to add that Washington County recently created a digital toolkit for any businesses that may want some guidelines on preventing outbreaks in their businesses. We're seeing that at several businesses across the state, and so we're trying everything that we can to minimize that, and there's some good suggestions in their toolkit to number one, prevent it, and number two, if somebody does get COVID, then there's some guidelines about what to do with the other employees and how to prevent spreading. So that's all I have today. So I guess let's turn the time over to Chief. I think he's got a few things that he would like to cover, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. Chief?
Very good. Thanks, Corey and Bruce and everyone for joining us, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. You know what? I should have closed my doors. 2 seconds.
While he's doing that, Bruce, you might mute yourself, Bruce, when.
Oh yeah, I love the informality of these meetings.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
As I started talking, I thought, oh, no one's going to appreciate this outside of my office. Anyway, so it's great to be here, and I can see, I think, most of everybody and know most of everybody that's joined us on the call. So that's certainly great to see everybody, or at least have you with us. So let me just dive right in. There's two things that I just wanted to talk with everybody about, and hopefully you'll find it useful. But first is kind of what's going on with the non-compliant business complaint process, and then I'll talk a little bit about the mask piece. But many of you may already know this, but with regard to the regulations on what businesses can and can't do, and so on and so forth, this is kind of how that works from our perspective. So there's two ways that the reports generally, and 99% of them, two ways that the reports about non-compliant businesses is going to happen. They're either going to go to the state of Oregon through OSHA or OLCC or one of those state governments, or it's going to get reported to Washington County. And so again, that's if somebody feels like there's a business that has too many people or doesn't have people masked up or whatever, isn't supposed to be open or whatever the case may be. We rarely, if ever, get those reports, and on the rare occasion that we do, we refer them to either the state reporting line or the Washington County. And I think most reporting just goes directly to those two places. The reason we do that is because that's the mechanism that's been provided to us. And so this kind of comes full circle, which is kind of weird, but I'll explain it. But that's what we've been told, and the guidance that we've been given for how the business compliance should work. So certainly folks can call us, but that just doesn't happen much. So if the report goes to the state, we're generally left out. The state is not going to reach out to the Sherwood Police Department or the city and say, hey, we got this complaint and whatever. The state's just going to manage it however they see fit. And as I said, the two main branches of state government that are going to get involved are going to be either OSHA or OLCC and deal with it. And again, we're kind of left out of the mix. The second route is through Washington County. So if somebody reports to Washington County and files a complaint with Washington County, we have requested, because the county has given us options, we have requested, Sherwood, that we want to be notified of all those complaints. And the reason we've asked for that is because we want to maintain local involvement. So any complaint that comes into Washington County about a Sherwood business, it's our expectation that we're going to get notified. And for the most part, the county is going to refer that complaint to us. Now, there are some circumstances and situations where the county may notify us and also take some form of action. For example, they may notify us that there was a complaint received about a particular business, and they may tell us that they are sending a letter to the business, and as well as notifying us. So that may happen, or they may just say, we're referring this complaint to you for further follow-up. The reason we want to do that is because, as I said, we want to maintain local involvement with our Sherwood businesses. And our position is that we're not going to be taking enforcement against any Sherwood business. So if somebody complains about a Sherwood business that's not in compliance with the executive orders or the guidelines, we're going to work with the business. We're going to make sure they're aware of the complaint that came in, talk about, what specifically is the issue, and work with them through that process and educate them, or find out maybe they have a different position on it. Maybe they're not aware of some of the requirements, whatever the case may be, but we're not going to take enforcement action unless it's extremely egregious and it's clearly a huge problem, which I can't even think of an example of that specific to this issue. But so just everybody needs to know, and it's important that we know. I've communicated this to our city leadership. City council knows our position on this. We do not want to be, nor are we going to be, in the business of citing our local Sherwood businesses. Rather, we're going to try to help our local businesses succeed, because that's really what needs to happen. That's where we're at. So again, our role with regard to business compliance is going to be to try to educate and try to support and, quote, help folks stay out of trouble as it is. So that's really in terms of businesses being compliant or non-compliant, that's kind of how that process works. And again, it may be that a business, your business may get contacted by the state, and we're never going to know that. So if you call and say, hey, how come this happened? I'm not going to know anything about that. If you get contacted by the county, I should know about that, because they should have notified us. And if the county decides to send a letter out, there's been one example of that where they forwarded us the complaint but told us we're sending a letter out. We're going to consider that taken care of at that point, because it's an advisory letter, an educational letter, and from my perspective, there's no reason to have communication visits from multiple agencies. I just don't think people need that. So the goal is compliance and to make sure that everybody's doing what they need to do to be successful. So any questions about that first kind of component? I think that's been around longer, and my sense is that most people have a little bit better idea on the non-business compliance piece.
And just a reminder that if you do have questions, you're welcome to either unmute and ask that question directly, or if you'd rather, you can use the chat box and ask that question. We'll monitor that and relay any of those questions on. I don't see any questions, Chief, but I have one, and I think if I understand what you're saying, the focus of what you're saying here is really on community members who are complaining about a business doing something they shouldn't be doing or not doing something they should be doing. What about flipping that? And if businesses are having trouble with a particular customer or something where they refuse to leave and because they don't want to wear a mask and they want to shop, what role do you play in that?
Yeah, so that's part two. I'm going to get into that in a second.
Okay.
And we'll have time for questions afterward if something comes up. So that's a good segue. The next piece of this is a non-compliant individual and or business, for that matter, with regard to the mask requirements. But really the issue has been, and I think at times may continue to be, are the non-compliant individuals that come into your business and they don't have a mask on. So I think everybody knows or should know that masks are required across the board now. It's no longer a business decision. And as of this morning, the governor has said it's for anybody that is 5 years old or older. So there's no longer differing requirements for children unless they're under 5, and then it's only recommended but not required. So So anybody out in public, basically in any place of business, they have to have a mask on. I think once they sit down, if it's a restaurant and they're sitting down to eat or drink or whatever, then obviously the mask has to be removed. And there's other steps that are taken to create that safe environment. But retail outlets and everything else is masks are required. So what do you do if somebody comes in and they don't have a mask on? That's the way the requirements are set up, and the way the approach we're going to take is that's really between you as the business owner and the customer. So our expectation is that you're going to enforce that for your business because that's your responsibility, and certainly you want to have those relationships with your customers. Where we come in is if somebody's giving you a hard time, and then if that happens, and it has happened, we've taken several calls on that. You simply need to call us and we're going to show up. And what we're going to do when we show up is, number one, we're going to keep the peace, because we haven't had that many, but a good percentage of the ones that we have had involve a customer that's gotten angry and frustrated and doesn't want to wear a mask, and a business owner that's kind of feeling like, what am I supposed to do here? And so they're probably frustrated. And generally when that happens, the communication starts to break down. And so the first thing we're going to do is make sure everybody's calm, everybody's peaceful, but it's really, the onus is really going to be on the business. So it's really up to the business owner to make the decision on how they want this to go. And of course, they have to maintain compliance. So our request is that businesses do that and just make it very clear to the person, you've got to have a mask on. Now, we can help with the process. Maybe the person has some kind of a medical exemption, and we can work through that process, and ultimately it's going to be the business's decision. So that's the one really key point on this, is we cannot enforce your rules in your place of business. So we're just going to be there to support you and help you. But at the end of the day, the business owner has to make the decision about, okay, I'm going to accept the medical exemption or whatever the case may be, or I'm not going to, and I can't have this customer in my store. And then we will help, get that, facilitate whatever needs to happen with that. But again, that's going to be the business's call. And if it gets to the point where somebody doesn't want to leave, then we will enforce, the trespass statutes and tell them, look, you've been asked to leave. That's no longer about the mask. You now have to leave. And normally the calls that we've had, even though some of them have been, have gotten a little tense, they all work out very well. The last one we had, the customer sat outside and waited while his wife completed the business inside with a mask, and he admitted that he probably got too frustrated and too angry, and the business owner was like, everything's fine, we don't need to push any issues or press any charges or anything like that. And so it all worked out at the end. But so that's kind of how the mask process works. Again, we're going to get called on that when there's a problem, and we would say, if you have any problem, you should call us. So clearly the expectation needs to be communicated by the business. If the person refuses to put on a mask and the business feels like they need to have a mask, either they don't, there's no exception, there's no other reason or whatever, and the person refuses, then I would say step 2 would be, I need you to leave the place of business. If you're not willing to have a mask on, then I need you to leave. And if they refuse to leave at that point, then you need to call us. And that would be a justified 911 call, and just say, I've got somebody that's refusing to wear a mask. They're unwanted. They're refusing to leave, and we'll get there and get things taken care of. So I think I'll leave it at that. There's not a whole lot to that. It's fairly straightforward, but perhaps folks have questions about that as well, or the first part.
If there's no questions on that, I have a question on something else, but let's see if there's questions.
Yeah, I don't see any on the chat, but I'll offer a clarification that of my understanding based on some of the presentations I've heard. In fact, last week from BOLI and from Oregon OSHA, and they were very clear that, as you said, Chief, that it's no longer up to the business to decide, well, if they don't have a mask, maybe we let them in or maybe we don't, unless there is, they're in a restaurant and they're eating or there's one of those approved excused reasons. But the safety of the employees of the business, the safety of the other customers in the store supersede the accommodation that should be made if somebody has a legitimate health reason not to wear a mask. And the way the business gets around that is they offer other ways to accommodate them, whether it's tell us what you need, we'll go in, we'll pull it off the shelf, we'll run your card, we'll bring it out to your car, we'll bring it out to the door, we'll deliver it. As long as you can make those kinds of accommodations, then you are asked and mandated to not let those people in the store if they refuse to wear a mask. Is that your understanding too?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of onus on the business owner to understand what those exceptions are and make those decisions. But if I, as a business owner, have a customer that says, well, I've got a medical reason not to wear a mask, and I say, okay, then you're fine. It's important that everybody understand that they're probably going to get pushback on that, right? So the next customer that comes in is going to say, why don't they have a mask on? You're not doing your job. And so as uncomfortable and as much of a pain, certainly, and not something we're used to, it may be, I think the safest and position to take is we really need people to wear a mask. And I would hope that anybody that has a medical exemption has figured out some way to offer proof of that. But I'm sure their life is difficult because I'm sure they get confronted by others as well. Unfortunately, not everybody knows how to behave themselves in a public setting, and something as simple as wearing a mask brings out some very, very emotional responses at times. So I don't envy business owners, but my advice would be just really make sure that you're being as strict and as consistent as you can, because that's just going to save you some heartache in the end, I think. But regardless, at the end of the day, know that we're here to help you. If you have a problem with a customer that's refusing to follow your direction and or leave the store, then all you need to do is call us.
Yeah, and I'll
Any other
just
questions on this? Sorry.
sorry, I was just going to add that if a business does decide to look the other way, so to speak, and allow someone who has a medical condition to come in without a mask, if another customer reports that business and Oregon OSHA, for example, calls, what they're going to tell you is you should not have let that person in. You have to make other accommodations. It's not in the best interest of your other employees and the other customers. So just you have to be prepared that that's the response you're going to get. Okay, I think we've belabored that enough.
So unless there's other questions in the chat and I can't seem to access it, I just wanted to ask another question about maybe a different topic. I seem to remember maybe where I was noticing that there was some visible burglary activity that had gone on in a certain particular area, the Old Town area of Sherwood. And I was wondering if there's any comments you have or any thoughts you have about how to work with businesses in this COVID-19 era to make sure that they have good security and what have you.
Sure, Bruce, thanks. So really good security, the definition of good security hasn't changed based on COVID, right? So the case you're referring to was the burglary at Clancy's. And frankly, we caught those folks within 48 hours, give or take. And the reason we were able to catch them is because we had amazing video. And so when you have that kind of video, you're able to identify people, or at least you know what they look like. And so they had gone into Wilsonville, and I don't remember exactly what for, but they got identified. They got recognized from the video. So just makes a huge difference. So I know video surveillance systems, alarm systems, those kinds of things can be quite expensive. From my perspective, it is a great investment that you may not see direct financial returns on like you would, say, marketing, but you will certainly see indirect returns from the reality of that. Gosh, we've ever since we had that system, we haven't had a break-in, or we haven't, had any issues. Or when we do have a break-in, the perpetrators have a great chance of being caught and justice served. So the basics of security, plenty of lighting, right? People that are doing bad things don't like to be seen by other people. And so they like dark places, dark corners, dark alcoves. So if you have any of those, fix it and get lots of lights out there. The other thing to remember about lights is that if a police officer is driving down the road and there's bad guys around your business, they're going to try to hide in a dark spot. If there are no dark spots for them to hide, they will be seen by the officer driving by. So it just makes the police officers that much more effective. So I think lighting is probably the most critical, the step one, and probably the cheapest thing that most businesses can do. Just flood your property and your business with light so that there's just no place for people to hide. Once you've done that, then you start looking at, okay, if we've had problems, we have a history, or we have a potentially high target business that could get broken into, then maybe if we have lots of windows where they can smash a window and grab product, whatever the case may be, you probably want to think about getting an alarm system. And there's an audible alarm system which would immediately make lots of noise and in theory chase people off. Or you can get a silent alarm, which would mean that they wouldn't know the alarm's going off, and we're racing to the business and hopefully going to catch them in the act. And then security cameras, right? So if something happens, all we have to do is go back and pull the video, and the systems these days are digital, and the video quality is pretty amazing. So we can usually get pretty good pictures, and we can put them all over the news or social media, depending on the case, and try to get the folks identified. So I think that's a little bit more than what you asked for, Bruce, but I just want to take that opportunity to kind of give a crime prevention 101. So if any business is like, well, what are some things that I should be aware of? We don't get requests for this very often, but we'd be glad to have an officer come out and look at the business and say, here's some areas that are hard for us to see when we drive by that you might try to light up or close off, or whatever the case may be. We're certainly available to do that, COVID or not. So don't hesitate to ask if you need that help.
Thank you, Chief. So, other questions?
Chief, are you still doing the nighttime patrols? I know not too long ago we had the little sticker on the door when I came into the office that said some officer had been there and everything checked out. Is that still a regular occurrence?
Yes. So during the pandemic, we did modify some of our patrol response procedures just to limit exposure to not only our officers but also the community. But we still are checking businesses. We still do the night eyes, and obviously in the middle of the night, we're not running into people as much. And so that's not nearly as risky behavior, but yeah, we're still doing those. Yep.
And I know that this forum is focused on business talk, but just from a community benefit standpoint and from my own personal experience standpoint, lock your cars at night. There's been a rash of car break-ins, and I think it's been made clear that if you just lock your car, that's 99% of the time, that's all it takes to get them to move on.
Don't leave anything valuable sitting there, right, in the car. It's obvious.
Probably 80% or more, maybe, of the cars that we have that are broken into aren't really broken into, and items stolen are unlocked. And we'll watch video, and you can literally watch the perpetrators walking down the street from car to car, just checking door handles. That's all they're doing. And they just check, lock, check, and then one opens and they're in the car. They don't break into cars anymore. And frankly, what's sad, the reality is they don't need to. So thank you, Corey. That's a great reminder. Home, at businesses, wherever, just if people would just lock their cars, we'd see a huge reduction in thefts from vehicles.
Not so much a business question either, but with COVID, I just wonder if you have some comments on how you're protecting your officers in this pandemic. As they interface with members of the public, and if there are any some differences that you're going through now than before the pandemic.
Well, the most obvious that I think most people are going to see is the masks, right? So we started wearing masks immediately. We started limiting the opportunities for contact and interaction between officers and community members to protect both sides. And so we kind of drew back on some of the proactive, less emergent activities. And we responded only to emergency calls and tried to take some of the less urgent calls over the phone to reduce the face-to-face contact. So those are the main things we did. And then, of course, Bruce, as you know, a lot of the steps that the city implemented, we certainly are adhering to here as well in the workplace to make sure people stay healthy and we don't spread any potential bugs and viruses amongst one another. So a lot of cleaning.
So, Corey, are we seeing anything in the chat?
No, nothing in the chat.
Not even anything from Josh Peterson, which surprises me.
I saw Josh was joined us, so welcome. And thanks for opening in Sherwood.
Again, going back to the point that this is available for the community should they choose to listen in. A lot's been made in the last 24 hours about the neighborhood concerts. Do you want to take a minute and just kind of explain what happened there and how people can proceed in the correct way if that's something that they're interested in doing?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last night at City Council as well, but it really comes down to a few different things, not the least of which is being aware of the present restrictions, but that really is not the main issue. The main issue is that the city has procedures and processes and a few rules in place so that we're able to manage those kinds of things. And when you have impromptu versions that literally stand up in a matter of days, it doesn't meet those restrictions or requirements and oftentimes block streets. And so that's really what it came down to, is that we just need folks to follow the process, and so that we have a chance to review it and make sure everybody's going to stay safe. And by safe, I mean that we're not going to have streets that are blocked that we're not aware of, that we can get through with emergency vehicles and so on and so forth. So that's really what it came down to.
So it's not so much a matter of they're not allowed, it's just they just have to go through the right process to make it happen.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else want to ask any questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Chief. We really appreciate all the work that you and your staff do and your officers. This is a great city to live in, and in large part, that's because of the things that you do, and we appreciate your leadership. And we hope that the businesses will feel comfortable and confident in calling on you for assistance in whatever way they need. And I know that our city, by and large, is very pro-business. They understand the importance of it, and we want to make sure that everybody can operate correctly and safely, and that they can thrive. So thank you for your efforts and for your time today. And unless anyone wants to pipe up here at the last second, we'll call it for this week, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.
I was just going to say one thing, and that is thanks also, Chief. And we're not only pro-business, but it's a very safe community, thanks to the community and thanks to the work that you do. So we greatly appreciate the partnerships.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.